So we are in class number 9. We did not meet last week. I did hear of one individual that came by and tried to come, and I was afraid that might happen, but that is all right. We're glad that you're here tonight, and tonight and then next Tuesday will be the last 2 classes that we have. But I'm glad you're here, and for this particular class tonight, we're going to we're not necessarily going to look at a new subject so much as we are new material within the subjects that we've been discussing. We've entitled the lesson tonight, Answering the Arguments. And basically what we're going to do is I'm going to take some of the material, number one, that I did not get to cover previously because I ran out of time in those particular topics, and also some subjects or some additional material that you had come to me about, some questions that you had regarding particular subjects. Tonight we're going to revisit alleged contradictions, 2 in particular that had posed some issues with those of the congregation, those that have been attending, I should say, this series. And then, time permitting, we're going to look at something to do with the inspiration of the Bible, and then also something to do with design. And so that's what we're doing with this tonight. Chances are, considering I started a few minutes late and I always have too much material, we'll probably do a little bit more of this last week, and then we'll move into our concluding study as well. But let's jump into it. I want to begin, if you have your Bibles, and I hope you do, I want to start with reviewing a bit of the alleged contradictions. There are 2 that came up, and both of these are very, very commonly used. And this particular one I should have covered already. I don't know why I didn't, because this one is so common. And then the next one that we'll see in a moment is one of maybe even greater difficulty. But let's talk about Peter and the rooster, or in the King James Version, the cock crowing, as you sometimes describe it. Now, by way of review and by way of repetition to hopefully embed these things in your minds, what were some of the things to consider when trying to find whether or not an alleged contradiction was factual in the fact that it would or would not be a contradiction? How would we go about, what were some of the list, things in that list that we gave to check to be sure of whether or not it was a contradiction? Do you remember any of those? Okay, good. Time frame. Time is important. Are we talking about the same time frame? Remember, Billy Joe Bob might be rich and poor as long as he's not rich and poor at the same time. That's not a contradiction. Maybe he was rich in his 20s and he's poor in his 70s. Right? So John Doe is, Billy Joe Bob is rich, Billy Joe Bob is poor. That wouldn't be a contradiction if it was different time periods. Time is very critical. What was another? Okay, good. Supplemental information. Supplemental information. If it's not something that literally contradicts what was said, if it's just adding a little more information on, then it's not contradictory. It's certainly not in that case. Remember that one, because that one's going to come up a bit in one of these. Any other ones that you might remember? Good, the same sense. Very good. That one's also important tonight to remember. The same sense. Someone may be physically dead, but spiritually alive. Or someone might be spiritually dead, but physically alive. So in what sense, if we say Billy Joe Bob is dead, well, what if he's walking around earth and he's still alive? How could he be dead? Well, maybe he's spiritually dead. What sense is the phrase or verb or whatever the case being used in? Any others that you remember? We had several. Person, good. Are we talking about the same person? James died, but James is still alive. What? How's that possible? Well, it might be 2 different Jameses. Right? Are we talking about the same person? Very, very good. There also was one more. Does anybody remember what it was? Simply be fair to the Bible. Be fair. Is it something that is legitimately a contradiction, or are we being too critical about things? That sometimes is a possibility. But for the most part, remember the person, place, thing, the time, the sense, the supplementation. Those things are what's important. So, refreshing those rules in our minds, let's look at this particular alleged contradiction, and see what's going on. Now, I'm going to need a number of volunteers tonight. Please don't be shy, because I have a lot of verses that we'll need to read quickly for time's sake, but we need to read so that we can put the 4 Gospels together in both of our alleged contradictions. So some volunteers maybe that will read for me, and I'll give you some of these verses. All right, Miss Jane, if you will get Matthew 26, When we come back to you, it'll be verse 34, and then if you'll jump down to verses 74 and 75, we'll read that one first. Did I have another hand over here somewhere? Mike, if you'll get Luke 22, it'll be the same thing. You'll read verse 34 and then 60 and 61. And then Miss Beverly, if you'll get John 13:38. And then you'll actually let me get to John Lee, if you will. Will you do John 18:27? Since that's several pages over, that'll be easier than making her have to flip right after she reads. And then one more. Volunteer for this part anyways. Anyone else? Maybe? David, thank you, brother. Mark 14, verse 30. And then jump down to 68 and following. And I'll guide you along as we go through this, making sure we're reading the right thing. All right, we're talking about Peter and the denial of Christ. Denying Christ, how many times did he do so? 3 times. There's no contradiction there. They all say 3 times. But the rooster is a bit of a problem, at least in the minds of some skeptics. And they believe that there's no good answer for this. But let's look at it. Matthew 26, Miss Jane, in verse 34.
Jesus said to him, "Surely I say to you, that this night before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times."
Excellent. According to that passage, it implies that the rooster is going to crow how many times? Just 1 time here. The rooster is going to crow, and when he crows, that you will have denied me 3 times at that point. All right. Again, it doesn't say 1 time, but that's the way it kind of reads, right? It says when the rooster crows. Verses 74 and 75, Miss Jane.
Then he began to curse and swear, saying, "I do not know the man." Immediately a rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the word of Jesus who had said to him, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." So he went out and wept bitterly.
Excellent, excellent. He went out and wept bitterly. So this particular cursing of Peter here in verse 74 is the 3rd time, and then the cock or the rooster there crows. Fair enough. Now, Luke chapter 22 and verse 34. Who had that one? Mr. Mike.
Then he said, "I tell you, Peter, the rooster shall not crow this day before you will deny 3 times that you know me."
Excellent. The rooster's not going to crow until you've denied me 3 times. Very interesting wording there. Remember that one. Verses 60 and 61 now. What happens?
But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are saying." Immediately while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times."
Excellent. So at this point, is there any contradiction between Matthew's account and Luke's account? No. Very, very simple. Both of them say he'll deny 3 times and then the rooster will crow. All right, John 13, verse 38. Miss Beverly.
Jesus answered him, "Will you lay down your life for my sake? Most assuredly, I say to you, the rooster shall not crow till you have denied him 3 times."
Excellent. Notice again, the rooster's not going to crow until you deny me 3 times. Very critical in that wording. At least the skeptics are using it that way. He's not going to crow until 3 denials. Chapter 18, verse 27, Mr. John Lee.
Peter then denied again, and immediately the rooster crowed.
Excellent. Again, that's his 3rd denial. So again, with the book of John, is there any contradiction at this point? Allegedly. You see any issues there? Okay, well, when we get to Mark, this is where our alleged contradiction arises. If Brother David will read Mark 14 and verse 30, we'll notice together what the alleged contradiction is.
And Jesus saith unto him, Verily I say unto thee, that this day, even in this night, before the cock crows last, thou shalt deny me thrice.
Excellent. In this passage, before the rooster crows how many times? Twice. You will deny me 3 times. Now look at verses 68 through 72. Would you mind reading that as well? Same chapter, Mark 14, just jump down to verse 68 through verse 72.
Mark 16.
Mark 14. Mark 14, yes sir.
Oh, yeah. But he denied, saying, I know not, neither understand I what thou sayest. And he went on out onto the forest, and the cock crew.
Excellent. So verse 68, he's already denied. At this point, how many times has he denied? Just once. Just once, and what's happened already? The cock crew, the rooster crowed. He's only denied one time and the rooster's already crowed. Verse 69, the maid sees him again. Verse 70, he denies again. Verse 71, he denies again. Notice at the end of verse 7, or beginning of verse 72, after the third denial, and the second time, the cock crew, or the rooster crowed. And Peter remembered what the Lord had said. Notice how he words it. Before the cock crow twice, thou shalt deny me thrice. And when he thought thereon, he wept. So the obvious alleged contradiction is the other three Gospels say that he's going to deny 3 times, and then the cock will crow. The cock won't crow until he does so 3 times. But according to Mark, the rooster crowed twice. In fact, the first crow was after the first denial, and then the second was after the third. How do we answer that argument? Very, very common argument, a very strong one. This is a very alleged apparent contradiction in the eyes of many skeptics, and it's given some problems even within the Lord's body. Is it a clear contradiction? Bill?
Mark's the only one who really heard what was said.
Okay, it's a good way to put it. Do you want to explain?
Well, there's no contradiction as far as the cock crowing. We know that happened.
Yes.
But you have 4 different writers writing about the same subject. So 3 did the short version of it, but Mark recorded it. I would assume the way it was said. He heard it and he recorded it that way.
Okay, good. Excellent. That's a great...
You could do the same thing in this class,
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great way to put it. How does that work? Somebody else maybe put that in your own words. What's happening? How is it that Mark would be the one that knew all of the information, or that had it correctly? Not that the others had it incorrectly, but how is it that Mark kind of adds to it without contradicting it? If the other 3 Gospels said that the crow or the rooster would only crow 1 time, only, if it worded it that way, then we would have a contradiction. But the other 3 never used the word only. They say before the rooster crows, you'll deny me 3 times. All right, but again, you've got this alleged issue here. Any other comments before I kind of give an illustration and kind of add to what Bill's saying? But any other thoughts? Because I don't want to avoid that. Stan?
Mark was a little more educated, a little more eloquent than some of his writings. And in my opinion, that's where this differential is.
Okay, yeah.
Because his explanation is, as Bill said, his explanation is right, but it may have just a little more eloquently spoken.
Okay, good.
There's a difference in you speaking up there and me.
Well, you'd be the eloquent one. That's what. No, that's outside of the last part of that. That's well said. I think you're on the right lines. Which of the things we talked about to begin with, which of these does it fit into? Are we talking about a sense issue, a time issue, supplementation? What's going on here?
Time issue.
Well, that's true. Somewhat time is there. What's Mark doing in spite of the other 3? Jane?
I think it's extra information because
Okay, good.
in the other ones, crows can be plural. We don't know how many times.
Okay, good.
This crow is a verb, but crows like more than one.
Yes. Yep, absolutely.
It doesn't give how many the numbers in the other 3 versions.
Exactly. The other 3 didn't say how many, but Mark does. And so I think you're exactly right. This is an issue of supplementation. Mark's giving a little extra info. What then would the other 3 writers, what crow would they have to be referencing? The second one, or the final one. When they say the cock's not going to crow, or the rooster's not going to make that racket until he's denied me 3 times, they're referencing the final crow. An illustration I was reading to kind of help maybe explain it. If you go to let's say you go to a football game. How many quarters are in a football game? 4. You've got 4 quarters. All right, let's say it's a high school football game, and after each quarter, there is a buzzer. All right? There's a buzzer after each of the 4 quarters. Well, let's say a father who knows the game really well again, this is just a hypothetical situation. Now, not to pick on ladies or men, and maybe the mother in some cases knows more. But in this case, in this family, Dad knows a little more about this. So he says to his son, "I'm going to meet you at the concession stand after the buzzer, and we'll go home." But maybe the mother says to the son, "Son, remember, after the fourth buzzer, we're going to go home. We're going to meet at the concession stand and go home." Well, true or false, that son probably knew what the father meant when he said, "After the buzzer, we're going to go home." Right? Is that a contradiction? Did the father and mother contradict in that scenario? No. But the mother kind of went into more detail. It's the final buzzer that we're going to meet after. But the dad just says, "Hey, we're going to meet after the buzzer." And the son knows what that means. So again, I think the other three writers, they're not contradicting what Mark says. They're just referencing the final crow. And that's exactly going to be in line with what happened there in Mark. Does that make sense? Is that as clear as mud? Okay. Any other thoughts? Any other maybe explanations or addendums to that would help at all?
We have to study and rightly divide.
That's right. Absolutely.
Did you look at any liberal translations to see what they said?
In this case, I did not. I didn't. Sometimes I do. A lot of times I'll use several translations. In this case, I didn't. I didn't imagine that any of them would use a different number. You never can tell. I'm sure some of them would say rooster. A lot of them probably say rooster instead of cock. But it is possible. Did anybody have a version that said something different than the number 2 there, or second time, or anything like that would have added to it? I've never heard of that in this particular passage, but that's a great question.
Well, that could be part of the controversy on why somebody might have questions because of the translation that they're trying to.
That's true. And that's an important point to make note of.
Very important.
Yeah, translations, based on the translation you're using, you might have some issues. You take a verse like Romans 12:1 and you open the New American Standard Version, and you're going to read that everything we do is worship, in essence. But if you read that from most of the other translations, it's going to say the word, or I say most of them, not the modern ones, but New King James, ASV, they're all going to say service there. And there's a huge difference in that. So translations can cause you problems. I don't know if they would in this particular case.
I like the King James Version.
But
it's very bold.
very bold.
No slack. It tells it like it is.
There you go. There you go. And I do. Obviously, you know that I'm preference to the King James as well. But it has problems. They all do. All of them have different issues. That's right. Exactly. And that's why that's so good to have one of those lexicons, concordances, and you can use those to kind of reference that. I saw Barbara first, and then Bill. Ladies first.
I'm just going to say there are many instances where we have to read all of the gospel accounts.
Yes.
The whole picture.
That's exactly right.
Peter cutting off a man.
That's right.
To get his name and full picture.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. Only one of the 4 mentions that his name was Malchus, and you wouldn't know that. And again, that's not contradictory. It's just supplementation, just additional information. And that's, somebody says, why didn't we just have one gospel? Why 4? Well, each of them brings something new, and they're writing to with a different focus to different groups, and especially John. John is much more different than the other 3, but that's a whole other study. Bill?
Yeah, the point I want to make is if they're nitpicking about whether the rooster crowed twice, 3 times, and whatever, how many, and listen, the facts of the scripture,
That's it.
Scripture is Peter denied him 3 times.
Yeah, exactly. There's no contradiction or any confusion on that point, and that's the key there. You're exactly right. And it's sad. It's sad that they look for things like that to get in. But that's the emphasis. That's exactly right. And what he did when he realized it, and that he went out and he repented of that. You're exactly right. Any other thoughts on this particular one? All right, go ahead.
To me, if you had 4 people that witnessed any one event, and every one of them gave exactly the same details in exactly the same order, to me that would be more suspicious than some.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. If you had 4 different people and they all did the exact same, what's the word I'm looking for? Testimony or whatever of what they saw, it's going to be very suspicious when they're the exact same and they're not really able to speak freely. And you can see that God, even though they were inspired, He allowed them to use their own free will to some degree, kind of guiding them, pushing them along to make sure everything was accurate. Jinky?
When I was working for Saturn Corporation, we had an exercise where an individual would tell a person something, and it'd go down through 30 people.
Yes.
And it would be nowhere close to what it started.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely. That's it's like that game Gossip that kids play in the circle.
Yeah,
that's right. You just pass it down, and that's going to change. That story's going to change. But and if there was real contradictions, then we could think, well, maybe that happened in this case. But they certainly don't. All right, let's move on to this one. This one I know a particular was brought from someone in the congregation to me that really was kind of maybe not struggling, but really tackling this one, and it was rather difficult, and I completely understand. Jesus in the grave, how many days and nights was Jesus said to be in the grave? Talking about his death after the cross. How long was he there?
3 days.
He's 3 days, right. 3 days. Let's look at a few of these just very quickly. Matthew 17:23, Mark 9:31, Luke 9:22, all of those three are going to say the same thing. Someone read one of those. Doesn't matter which one. For time's sake, let's just read one of these.
And they will kill him, and he will be raised on the third day.
Excellent. So according to that, which one did you choose, by the way?
Matthew 17:20.
Okay, excellent. According to Matthew there, he's going to be raised after or on the third day? On the third day. We understand what that means. And that's exactly what happened, right? Friday to Sunday there. Now, 1 Corinthians 15 and Acts 10, same idea. He's going to be raised on the third day. Paul would write and Luke would write. But let's turn together to these two. Let's go first to Mark 8:31, and then we're going to compare that to Matthew 12. And this is where the alleged contradiction and struggle comes in. Mark's account, poor Mark again, it's Mark. Mark chapter 8, verse number 31.
He began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again.
Excellent. Instead of being on the third day in this case, it says what? After 3 days. Now, when we use the term after, if you say, I'll be done after 3 days, what does that mean to you? On the fourth day, exactly. On the fourth day. 72 hours is going to pass, right? At least the way we would use that. Now, before we address it, let's also look at Matthew 12. If that's not enough, Matthew 12 and verse 40 might be the most difficult of all. Someone read that one for us. Matthew 12, verse 40.
For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth.
Excellent. 3 days and 3 nights. That's pretty specific. True or false, the Lord was in the grave for 3 nights?
No,
False.
didn't say that.
Didn't say that, or he wasn't?
It doesn't say that he was in the grave for 3 nights.
In that verse it doesn't?
Well, let me look at it.
I'm using the ESV. Just throwing that out there.
Okay. Verse 40, yeah. He'll be in the 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. At least in the literal wording, it says that he's going to be there 3 nights. You can see why this would be an alleged contradiction, why this would be brought up as an issue. How do we respond to this one?
Was it all night?
What do you think? Okay, good. You're on the right track already. Was it part of the night or all of the night? Exactly. Okay, keep in mind, we think of, again, when we record our days, we go day to night, right? Our day starts when? Midnight. And then you've got, quote, morning all the way until 12, and then it goes into what we would call night. And so we would say day and night. But again, how did they record?
6 o'clock was the day.
Okay, good. 6 o'clock, 6 a.m., not 12. And so when you see a reference to, say, the third hour of the day, that's 9 a.m. You see a reference to, and we're going to see in a little bit, to the ninth hour, then you're at 3 p.m. So they recorded it differently. In fact, and again, the Jews and the Hebrews of old, they went night to day. So, but regardless, the fact is, he says both 3 days and 3 nights, which seems to lend to the fact that there would have been around 72 hours that would have passed But we know that that certainly was not the case. Let me jump ahead here.
But we don't know what time the women came to put the spices on it.
That's true. We don't know the exact time.
On the third day.
We have a good indication as to the time of day.
Sometime,
Yeah,
but we don't know.
that's right. That's right. Because the sun was said to be to not even be over yet. It was rising. But one of the keys to this particular one, and it's a tough one. But I'm going to say this, and then I want to hopefully prove it biblically. But one of the things about the way that they would use time, in fact, when we did Alleged Contradictions, we talked a little about this, is if they referenced any part of the day, they might reference it as part of the day, or a lot of times they would just count it as a whole day, even if it was just 3 hours of that day. You remember we talked about, I believe it's Mark 8 and verse 2, where he references the fact that after 6 days he taught the people. He prophesied the kingdom will not come until the kingdom will come before you taste death. He prophesied of that. And then the Bible says that after 6 days, he led the inner circle up to be transfigured before them. When you go over to Luke's account, Luke says after 8 days, he led them up to be transfigured. And we came to the conclusion and understood that Luke added the terminal days in. He added the day that he prophesied and the day of the transfiguration, whereas Mark left those days out. So Luke recorded the part days as a whole day, and Mark didn't. And a lot of times you see that biblically. And if you can see that consistently, then that would kind of help to solve this issue. Because if we see them constantly doing that, both in historical books and in the Bible, then we can see that they would just word it this way. Even the day and night situation. Let me explain better by showing you some verses. Let's go to Genesis. And I hope that this will help those who were really studying this, and maybe this will help to bring some clarification. I certainly hope it does. Genesis 7 and verse 12. One of the first examples of this right off the bat in the book of Genesis. How many days did it rain during the flood? When the flood came, I should say. 40. According to verse 12, 40 days and 40 nights. Look at verse 17. Moses writing here says that the flood was 40 what? Days upon the earth. Does he mention nights there? No. Do you think Moses writing this wanted us to believe that God literally used 960 hours on the dot for which the rain would fall? Do you think it's meaning that literal in hour count? H-O-U-R? 960 hours? No. He's just saying 40 days and 40 nights. It might have been 39 nights and 40 days. And he might be using that, partial, again, part of the day as a whole. But you see in one verse, verse 12, 40 days and 40 nights. Another says 40 days. Again, why don't people say that's a contradiction? I think they give credit there, but...
I think they would, pretty much.
Yeah, well, maybe they would.
I think they would look at that. But, I mean, are you saying that part of the... so, like saying that it would start that night, and then after the 40 days, it would end that day? Exactly,
yes.
So something along those lines.
Exactly. Yeah, let's say, yeah.
So when Jesus says this, that he's saying on pretty much Thursday night, he died. There's one night, and then that one day, one night, one day, one night, then Sunday.
Exactly. That's it. That's the idea. It's kind of like, yeah, that's right. It's kind of like you check into, let's say you check into a hotel, and of course we're day and night in our order, but say you check into a hotel Thursday evening at 5:30. 5:30 you checked in, and let's say that you left the hotel at 5:30 the next day. All right? That's 24 hours. But what are they going to charge you for? 2 days. Did you stay 48 hours? No. But would it be a contradiction to say, I stayed there for 2 days? No, because that's what they're going to charge you for. Because the way they're using their timeline is if you're here past, 11 o'clock, whatever checkout is, then you're going to get charged for another day, even though you weren't here. Maybe that kind of helps to illustrate it. But let me show you maybe even a better... Oh, go ahead, Glenn. Be turning to 2 Chronicles 10.
Okay, I'm not exactly sure how to word this, but if you are 28 years old...
Yes, sir.
How many birthdays have you had?
How many what?
Birthdays have you had?
I have had 27, right?
29.
29. Yeah, I got that backwards. 29.
So expound on that.
If it's not a Bible question, I can't help you.
But, you have celebrated 28 consecutive
Yes.
years.
Yes.
But yet you've had 29.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point, yeah. I always do that backward. The same always was that way in school, too, with the centuries, right? The 21st century, well, that's the year 2000, but I would always do it the opposite way. But yeah, along those same lines, absolutely. That's a good point. Absolutely. 2 Chronicles 10, I want to give you 2 more examples, and both of these, or either one of these, I believe, really would help clarify and hopefully answer the argument. In 2 Chronicles 10, we have King Rehoboam, and Jeroboam's going to come to him and request that the gravity of the service that he's doing, it's a little too burdensome, too grievous, he says, and I want you to kind of back off on how much labor you're causing us to do. That's the context. Look at verse 4. Thy father made our yoke grievous. Now therefore ease thou somewhat the grievous servitude of thy father, and his heavy yoke that he put upon us, and we will serve thee. So Jeroboam says to Rehoboam, listen, it's tough. Your father made it a little hard. Why don't you lighten the load? Look at what he says in verse 5. He said unto them, come again unto me. What's the next word? After 3 days, and the people departed. Now if I said to you that I want you to come visit me after 3 days, you would come on what day? The 4th day, absolutely. Notice what they do, though, understanding what that meant and the way they used it. Look at verse 12. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam on the 4th. Is that what it says?
No.
What day did they come? The 3rd day. Notice, as the king what? As the king had directed, saying, come again to me on the 3rd day. He didn't say on the 3rd day. He said after the 3rd day. But that's not a contradiction because they understood what he meant. The 3rd day came, and that was included in that statement. Yes, sir?
This is where a different translation might come and help.
Okay.
In my version, like I said, the ESV, come to me again in 3 days.
In 3 days.
So the King James, the ESV changed that.
Okay, it didn't put after, it said in. Okay, excellent. I'm glad you brought that up. Excellent. So there you don't, so according to which version you have here, so it may or not clarify it as well, but the ESV says in. What does it say in verse 12? Does it use it?
Verse 12, I believe it says on the 3rd, come to me again the 3rd day.
The 3rd day, okay. Okay, yeah, so ESV kind of just changes it there for you. I'm using King James Version there that uses the word after. I tell you what, let's jump to this next one and do the same thing for, what's your name, by the way? Baron. Glad you're here, Baron. Let's go to Acts 10 and let's look at this case here as well. Maybe Acts will serve as a better example. I don't see how the translation could come into effect here, but I wouldn't be surprised either. Acts chapter 10.
Verse 3?
Yes.
About the 9th hour of the day, he saw clearly in a vision an angel of God come in and say to him, Cornelius.
Okay, excellent. So about the 9th hour of the day. We're on the same page there. So what hour of the day is the 9th hour to us?
4 o'clock in the afternoon.
3 p.m.
3, exactly. 3 p.m. 3 p.m. in the afternoon. So very, very literal here on the number, very detailed. So on 3 o'clock on this day, he sees a what? He sees an angel. Here's a vision telling him to go to Cornelius. Now, hold this thought. Let's just say, to make this simple, let's say that this is a Monday, okay? Just to kind of help, because I want you to really see that the time period changes here. So let's say we're Monday at 3 o'clock. Now look at verse 9. Let's keep reading ESV just to make sure we're not going to have a translation.
The next day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the housetop about the 6th hour.
Okay, excellent. So here we're on what day of the week? If the first was Monday, we're on Tuesday. Okay, we're Tuesday in about what hour? About noon, okay? And that part's not going to be important here, but so you've got Monday about 3 o'clock, and now we're Tuesday. All right, now keep going. Jump down to verses,
23.
Yes, sir, 23 and, yeah.
So he invited them in to be his guests. The next day, he arose and went away with them, and some of the brothers from Joppa accompanied him. And on the following day, they entered Caesarea. Cornelius was expecting them and had called together his relatives and close friends.
Excellent. Okay, again, and you would have to read previously to know that another day hadn't passed, but going along with this, now we're on what day? And now we'd be on Thursday. On Thursday. No time here, but we're on Thursday. All right, now let's get to verse 30.
And Cornelius said, 4 days ago, about this hour, I was praying in my house at the ninth hour, and behold, a man stood before me in bright clothing.
Excellent. So he says 4 days ago, here we are in verse 30, about the ninth hour, again, at same time, 3 o'clock, I prayed in my house. So what day are we ending up on here? If we start on Monday? Be on Thursday. Okay, we got Thursday. So Monday at 3 to Tuesday to Wednesday to Thursday. How many days is that, literally? 3 o'clock Monday to 3 o'clock Tuesday is. Tuesday to Wednesday is. And Wednesday to Thursday is. So we got 72 hours here. But what does Peter call it? How many days ago? 4 days ago. Why would Peter say 4 days ago when only 3 days had passed? Because he counted that partial as a day. Excellent. So if nothing else, maybe at least this example would be probably the best one since we can avoid the translation issue here. So you've got partial days being counted again here 4 days ago when really it was only 72 hours. Are you at least getting the point of what I'm getting at? The way they used those days when they say 3 days and 3 nights, or when they say days or after or on, they could be using a part of a day as a whole day, and some of them may not have, and it can be very confusing. Yes, sir?
I think that's an easy way to tell somebody as well. You could say to a new Christian who's maybe confused, how many days was Sunday ago? This night, Sunday. And then you could just tell them right then and there, yeah, exactly. Just like that partial day that we counted tonight, or like today or whatever, that's how that's the same thing that they did. Absolutely. Yeah, we don't get in and literally count. You know, this is how many hours it's been. We just name the days. We just give a number. And I think that's exactly what's going on here. Any other thoughts or comments about that? And that's again, I know that's a more difficult one, but I don't want to leave it until I know that we're confident in that. Does that make sense?
I'm still a little bit confused about the being in the grave 3 days and 3 nights.
Because he says 3 nights, yes.
Even with the time, how can you count 3 nights?
Yes, and that's an interesting one, because Matthew 12:40 that says that is using it, he's comparing it to who? To Jonah. And Jonah, literally, the Bible says there in Jonah that he was in the grave 3 days and 3 nights. So he compares, so in that reference he says, like Jonah was in the grave 3 days and 3 nights, so the Lord will be as well. Of course, he just literally comes out and says 3 days and 3 nights. So it's kind of unique in that he describes it that way. And I guess the closest comparison to that was Genesis, where one verse says 40 days and 40 nights, and another one just says 40 days. But again, I know it's because he says, that's the hardest one of all, because he says 3 nights. But I think it's involved in that comparison. Maybe somebody can explain that better.
I can't explain it. What about in the original Greek? Does it actually use the word and or in a conjunction?
Well, that's
or is it just translated differently?
That's a good question. Normally, this Bible I have is good about doing italics if it's not there. It's not always accurate, but yeah, in this case, according to this, it's there, but it'd still be wise to go and check and be sure. But I believe it is. I believe it is there in the original, but I'd have to look. I don't know for sure. I ought to bring a source, especially in a subject like this. I ought to bring something up here with me to use that, but to check, which I could do it on my phone. But yeah, exactly. Yes, sir. What do you think? A lot of them do. It might be most. I never really paid attention to what they have in common. As I think about some of them, like the cock crowing, the rooster was numbers. The case with the days was numbers. A lot of them have to do with names as well. There's one about Jethro and Reuel. Which one was it? That's a whole other one. I wish I remembered all the ones we'd covered, but I would say a lot of them are number related. Because of that very fact. The 12 apostles, remember we talked about, he referenced that Jesus went to the 12, but Judas was not there. So how was it the 12? And we talked about the big 12 and how that name kind of sticks, even though it doesn't have that many people in it. So a lot of them do have numbers, and it might be fair to say that most of them are number related. Would be interesting to see. Certainly a lot of them are. That's a good observation. Numbers are easy to be critical about.
Raised on the third day. Oh, I'm confusing myself.
It's hard. Maybe I should have put a chart up here too. You start on, well, you got Friday. About what hour of the day that, go ahead, Miss Jane.
Well, they count it sundown to sundown.
Right, exactly.
And any part of the day would be considered a day.
Yes.
What do we put in a day? We put a night and a day together.
That's a good way to put it. That's a good point, yeah.
Friday, he died before sundown because they wanted him to be, because they didn't want that to mess up their
Yes.
Sabbath.
Yes,
So
exactly.
Friday counts as a day and a night
Because they count it as a full day, yeah.
Saturday counts as a day and a night because you had to.
That one definitely was, yeah.
Once you had sundown, now you're into Sunday. He rose after that.
Yes.
The next morning he rose, so he was into the red part of that day too.
Excellent.
That's how you get your day.
Excellent. For the sake of the audio, let me repeat that quickly. That's way better than I explained it. You hit the nail on the head. Why would they say 3 days and 3 nights? Because, again, if they're just counting part of the day as the whole day, that includes both the day and the night. So Friday, when he passed, after, they came and we were talking about she referenced that because of the Passover, they had to speed it up because of the Sabbath. And so he died Friday night, well, we would say Friday evening, and then Saturday and then Sunday. So you've got 2 parts. You've got part Friday, part Sunday, and then a whole Saturday. But because they're including it, because they're referencing as a whole, then that's going to include the day and night of all 3 because they just referenced it as such. I didn't say that as well as you did, but I understood what you said.
I read something that they were comparing it to with Esther and the fasting of 3 days and 3 nights. And she said literally, then I want everybody to fast 3 days.
Yes, and 3 nights. In fact, I didn't put that in here, but I read that same thing as I was reviewing for this study. And you're exactly right. That's a great example too. I don't know why I didn't choose to use that one, but any other thoughts on that? I think that hopefully that covers it. It helps me. I learned something from that. That's a great way to put it. I think you're exactly right. And again, it's still not easy. It doesn't make it easy, but to discredit the entire Bible on something that's just not a clear-cut contradiction is such a tragedy. It really is.
The numbers are very symbolic too.
They are, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, in the future, I want to do a study on numbers. I think it would be interesting and with the congregation because there's so much symbolism there. Just about, arguably, probably not as much. It wouldn't be 50-50, but maybe 75-25 as far as how often those numbers are figurative or symbolic, I should say, not figurative. Very often there's much more meaning to a number than just the literalness of it. It's a very interesting study. Let me just quickly get into one final thought. Matthew 20. Let's go to Matthew 27 real quick. Matthew chapter 27. Let's not go to the next slide. Let's just end with this because I totally forgot I put this on here. Matthew 27. But I'm glad we kind of concluded before we got to this because this will be a conclusive passage. Matthew chapter 27, beginning of let's start in verse 62 and read together. Matthew 27, beginning of verse 62. I'll give everybody a second to get there. Now the next day that followed the day of the preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees came together unto Pilate, saying, Sir, we remember that the deceiver said, while he was yet alive, after 3 days I will rise again. Now what does the ESV say there?
After 3 days.
It does say after. Did yours say after too? Okay, good. So here we do have after in everybody's version. Okay, at least these versions. After 3 days, he will rise again. I absolutely love this point because if there was anybody that was critical about things, it was these Pharisees and these chief priests. And so Jesus says, after 3 days I will rise again. But I want you to notice verse 64. Command therefore that the sepulchre be made sure unto the 3rd day. Do you think if there was any possibility that they thought Jesus was literally saying after, as in day 4, that they would have only secured it for 3 days? No way. No chance whatsoever. They knew what Jesus meant when he said 3 days and 3 nights, or when he said after 3 days. He was going to rise on the 3rd day. So as long as they covered the base, as it were, for the entirety of that 3rd day, Sunday, it was complete. They did not have to wait until the 4th day. Lest his disciples come by night and steal him away. And the people say he is risen from the dead, so the last error shall be worse than the first. They wanted to be sure. And so certainly, so maybe that would be an extra verse to kind of clarify what we're talking about there. They knew, the Pharisees, as critical as they were, they knew he meant, I'm going to rise on the third day, even though he said after, or 3 days and 3 nights. It's hard for us to understand that because we just don't say it like that, especially 3 days and 3 nights. We would just say 3 days, but they literally counted it as a whole day sometimes, and so it makes for an interesting study, I believe. Any other last-minute questions, thoughts, concerns? All right. I sure do appreciate the good discussion. I always benefit from your comments, from your questions and thoughts, and I appreciate it. It's a challenging series for me, and I've really enjoyed doing it and growing from it. Next Tuesday will be our last class, and I want to continue with this. We're going to talk about the silence of the Scriptures a little bit, and we're going to talk about this new argument that has arisen for evolution called suboptimality. Suboptimality, if you've heard of that. If not, look that up, and we're going to talk about one of their strongest suboptimality. Let me pull it up here for you so you can, if you want to write it down and study it. In other words, it's not optimal. It's not optimal. We're going to talk about that next week, and then we'll conclude with how do we apply all of this? What is this whole series? What's it all about? What does it mean for me and for you?